Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of Riverfront U. We have been working on this project for months. I've been talking to the Dotsons saying, guys, we need to get a college network. Guys, we need to get a college network. And look, it's finally here. I'm Tim Daniel. I'll be in charge. You all know me from Late Night Reds on Sunday nights, but I'm also going to be in charge of our Xavier content here for the Riverfront U network. To my right, his name is Ryan Roberts. Ryan is, of course, the beat writer for our network for the UC football and basketball. He'll be hosting at large bid Bearcats on our network as well. Ryan, we've worked on this forever. We finally got it done.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. You see all of this work that we put in over the past, God, it seems like since January.
Yeah.
That's when all this really started. And then it's just kind of progressively gotten bigger, and the ideas have changed and grown. And yeah, it's awesome.
The network's changed and
yeah. Man, it's awesome. Having, the Late Night Reds, the Bengals pod, and now we're, transitioning to both, Xavier, NKU, and Cincinnati. It's pretty cool to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. We are. So before we get into all the advertising and stuff like that, again, I know we put this out on our Twitter recently at Riverfront U. We're definitely looking for more writers. If you guys want to help us out, Ryan and I have a goal that to build these relationships with the programs and universities. We would absolutely love to send people to cover as many sports as possible. We're just husbands and dads, so we just don't have the availability to do that. But if you guys want the opportunity, we definitely would love to hear from you. It's pinned on our X account, I guess we have to say now, where you can fill out the application, and we'll definitely take that in and look at it as well. But this week, Riverfront U is also brought to you by our good friends at SEATGEEK. SeatGeek is the number one place to get your tickets in the secondary market, and the easiest place to do it. They take the confusion out of buying tickets from the secondary market. Green means good, red means bad. Obviously, you know how that goes. But if you are using this for the first time and you are one of our listeners, be sure to use our code Riverfront, all one word, Riverfront, for $20 off your first order. Or you can do like all of us do and just make 30 email addresses and keep buying things. They don't know. Also, of course, this is brought to you by our friends, our Patreon family, where you also become a member, patreon.com/riverfrontcincy. We're in there all day talking about just different stuff, whether it's the Reds, the Bengals, our colleges, NBA basketball. We've got a lot of channels in there as well. But we've got through all the stuff here, and let's go ahead and get started with some conversation. We also have some great questions this week as well. Ryan, since UC is one of the schools that we have that has two sports, we'll start there, obviously. And UC football currently going on. Scott Satterfield, first year. They're 2-3. They've thrown a 3-game losing streak, unfortunately. 0-2 to start conference play. But you've seen some good, you've seen some bad so far. That Pitt game, obviously, a really, really good win for them, where they go on the road. They were actually a touchdown underdog and won that game by 6, and had to fight off a comeback. And then, Miami, of course, plays like the game of their life to get the victory belt for the first time in God knows how long. And then, of course, no one's going to fault them for losing to Oklahoma and BYU. But 2-3 at this point in the year, what do you kind of take away from the team at this so far?
Well, I think the frustrating thing for fans is that they've done a lot of really good things. I believe it's second overall in total defense in the Big 12, third overall in total offense in the Big 12. So they're doing a lot of good things. It's just between turnovers. Emory Jones has 6 turnovers over the last 3 games with interceptions. The red zone issues, they went, I think it was 17 straight possessions without a touchdown. And then, you watch the BYU game, the luck of it. So you see Chase Roberts, Keaton Slovis just throws the ball up for grabs. Brian Threats is coming in to make the interception. Chase Roberts cuts his route off, makes the catch, takes it, I think, 57 yards for a touchdown. So you look at the luck aspect of it as well. And then the blocked field goal against Miami, and next thing you know, you're sitting at 2-3. And, during the losses, they have not forced turnovers. Scott Satterfield, at his presser today, mentioned an interesting thing that the Big 12 teams that won this past weekend forced 13 turnovers combined. The teams that lost only forced 5. So when you have teams that are so similarly matched, especially in the conference like the Big 12, that's the difference in the game. You know, you have to force turnovers, you have to be good in the red zone. The team with the least amount of mistakes is going to win the game. And they simply haven't done that. You know, the 2 turnovers against BYU accounted for 14 points. You had the the muffed punt led to a BYU touchdown. And then you had the pick six on UC's first drive, and you're, fighting back the entire game. So it's just there's a lot of frustrations, but I do think they are close to figuring things out. And I think the bye week should do them some good.
Yeah, you mentioned Emory Jones. First week of the season, Big 12 Offensive Player of the Week. Since then, it's been kind of a little bit of a mixed bag. Obviously, the athleticism jumps out with him and the things he's able to do, his strong arm, his speed, things like that. But what is the thing of most that you kind of want to, you mentioned the turnovers, but what else is there that's kind of, do you see something that's just not clicking with him, or do you think it's just kind of pace of the game and what's happening? What do you think is kind of the ups and downs for him?
So one thing that it was the last press conference I was at for football before going on vacation. I asked Scott Satterfield how he manages that depth, especially at wide receiver and running back. You've got 3 different guys that have rushed for over 100 yards in the backfield with Ryan Montgomery, Corey Kiner, and then obviously Emory Jones. And then out wide, you've got so many different options that haven't really separated themselves outside of Xavier Henderson. I could see there being maybe some chemistry issues just because you do have such a large rotation with Donovan Ollie, Evan Prater, Aaron Turner, Xavier Henderson, Braden Smith. At tight end, we've seen Barack Falk, which is the third and fourth string tight end that's a walk on. Um, so I think it's just taking a little bit more time for them to figure out how to manage that depth successfully to really do what this coaching staff expects them to do. Because Satterfield's mentioned in the past, he's like, I'm a laid back coach, but I make it very clear to this team that if I call a play, we expect them to convert it successfully. So it's one of those things where unfortunately this transition is taking a little bit longer to get through. And I think, I'll be honest, I think the first 2 games gave us a little bit of false hope. They come out, they blow the doors off Eastern Kentucky. Emory Jones looks like, all world, has a storybook opening to his UC career. They go on the road to Pitt, do a lot of really good things, but, kind of stumble down the second half and pull out a win. And then it's like the offense just started to struggle those next 3 games. But it's encouraging the progress that they made in that second half against BYU. So hopefully that can carry over to Saturday's homecoming game against Iowa State.
Yes. Let's kind of talk about that game real quick. So Iowa State coming in 3-3. Obviously, don't have Brock Purdy playing quarterback for them this week, as he is the quarterback of the best team in football right now in the San Francisco 49ers. So there's that. The Bearcats have that going for them. What do you kind of expect? What was kind of mentioned today in the presser in regards to what jumps out about Iowa State on film to this team?
So Iowa State, their strength defensively is they run a 3-3-5, very similar to what Cincinnati ran under the previous regime under Luke Fickell. But they run a 3-3-5, and they're third in the country with 10 interceptions, and the only team in the country that has more than one player with 3 interceptions. So this is going to be a game where this is a defense that Emory Jones admitted he hasn't seen before. It's a little bit different just because it's I don't want to call it a gimmick defense, but it's just the 3-3-5 just isn't something that you see very often. And I think that's kind of what made Cincinnati so successful under Marcus Freeman and then Mike Tressel was they were running a defense that it was unique, kind of like preparing for the option offense. It's just not something you see very often. You might have 5 DBs on the field, but like the way Cincinnati does it is it's a 3-4 and you have more of a backer walked up, so it's kind of like a 4-2-5 look. So it's just a different scheme. Iowa State offensive line has only given up 3 sacks to date through 6 games. They're coming off back-to-back games where they had over 150 yards rushing. So it seems like they're hitting their stride at the right time. Just picked up a win over TCU, who's coming off a college football playoff, which I would say TCU's maybe been a little underwhelming, having lost to West Virginia and also Iowa State. Iowa State was in the game with Oklahoma. 6 minutes to go in the first half. It's a 21-20 Oklahoma lead. And then it's like the wheels just fell off for Iowa State. So this is definitely a game that, preseason, you looked at it and started like, oh, that should be a win. But it's crazy, man. This league, there's no gimmies, and that's the biggest difference between this league and the American.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Our last thing on UC football before we get into, I will get you to kind of give your thoughts overall, maybe a prediction on the game, but
Yeah.
if you want to. But we do have a question from the Bearcats. Our good friend Joe Farsing, who is the host of the Bengals show on the Riverfront. I forgot he changed the name on that. I got to get better at that. He says Cats are 2-3, but could easily be 4-1. Hell, if they weren't flaming hot garbage in the red zone, they could be 5-0. The schedule down the stretch is incredibly weak. Kansas is the best team remaining. Do you expect a bowl game? Is that something that will be more easily answered after Saturday?
Definitely think more easily answered after Saturday. And it goes back to getting false hope after those first two games. I think the goal coming into the season was, hey, regardless of who's the head coach, we're looking at a transition year. We lost a lot of guys to graduation. Cincinnati lost a lot of guys to the transfer portal. This is a team that had 21 plus transfers. That's a lot of different guys to integrate into a new system, especially when you throw in the fact that it's a new coaching staff. So at the beginning of the season, my floor was 5-7 and ceiling was 7-5. Ideally, you make a bowl game with 6 wins, 6-6, and then see how that 13th game goes. I do think fans should look at making a bowl game as a success in year one. Scott Satterfield's going to recruit really well. He did it at Louisville. He's off to a good start with the 2024 class. The 2025 class, I have a feeling if things trend the way that I'm seeing with some of the kids that they're in on from their days at Louisville, 2025 has a chance to, be better than the class that they have now, which is currently rated as one of the highest in program history.
Yeah, my favorite team just played that Louisville recruiting class, and it wasn't very fun.
Yeah. Sam Hartman, man. He was Louisville's best quarterback last year when Louisville played him, and he was Louisville's best quarterback again this year when they played him.
It's true. It's true. And he'll probably be USC's best quarterback on Saturday too.
So we'll get off topic a little bit. How long of a leash does Freeman get up there?
I think he's fine. If he had lost to like Navy, we'd probably have a different conversation. But Louisville being a top 25 team, they're on the road. They seem really patient with him, honestly, and I appreciate that. I think he's definitely far more likable than his predecessor, as you know very well,
Right.
as Cincinnati fans know very well. But I think he's going to be, he was recruiting really well. He's building a culture there. I'm not really mad at him for the Ohio State game. I think like they played well enough to win, just some things didn't go their way. It happens, right? It's football.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he'll be okay. I think next year is kind of the year he's going to have to make a jump, though. They obviously have the guys set in line for when Hartman moves on, and he's getting some time now. I think he's about to get his 4th game, so he's probably going to get his red shirt soon. And they're recruiting really, really well. So it seems like Notre Dame's finally at a point where, like forever, when these comeback seasons with Brian Kelly, it was like they're so good in the box, but skill guys they lack besides tight end. And it seems like finally they're getting athletes. So it's been fun. Obviously that Louisville game went about as bad as it possibly could, but life goes on, man. You play USC on Saturday, you probably lose that game too. And then hopefully you find a way to win the last 6. I don't know. Clemson's so up and down. They got that game. Thankfully that's at home. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think getting back to UC football, I think something they maybe lacked this year offensively, and it was actually brought up in today's presser that created a whole different topic within the Cincinnati fan base, is the lack of explosive plays. So they've been really good at, Corey Kiner ripping off 25, 30, 40-yard runs. But what they haven't been able to do is turn those into the 60, 70, 80-yard runs for touchdowns.
Yeah.
So, and I think the frustrating thing about this losing streak is, man, they've done so many good things. They've had 4 and 5 play touchdown scoring drives, and then they've had drives where they march 15, 17 plays in 8 minutes and get points. But when you get in the red zone, you got to start converting those field goals into touchdowns. And that's been another difference. In the Oklahoma game, you look at, I believe they had a missed field goal. They had 2 field goals for the game, but they were inside of Oklahoma's red zone 4 or 5 times and only got 6 points out of it. Might have been more than that. I would have to, it's been a couple weeks, but and defensively, I would say that the front 7 was looked at as being one of the focal points and strengths of this team. And I don't know that the linebacker position has been as good as we maybe expected. Defensive lines held up really well. I think this game this weekend is going to come. It's going to be a lot like the Pitt game. Who's going to be more physical? Iowa State, they're going to throw the ball. They got a young quarterback. They're going to let him throw it. But ideally, Matt Campbell wants to run. They want to grind the game out. And against that 3-3-5, UC is going to have an opportunity to run the ball. I think against BYU, they went away from the run too soon. Like Corey Kiner and Miles Montgomery were kind of doing what they wanted in the rush game, and they just, started letting Emory throw the ball around and weren't able to control the clock. And that, toward the end of the first half and into the second half. And I think they really need to lean on that more with Emory being so up and down in the pass game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's gonna be. I'm excited for the game. Actually, if Saturday's free now, so I can watch the game. Pretty much looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Let's change tides here a little bit. Let's go to basketball. Obviously for the Bearcats, big Bearcat basketball season coming up. Old friend John Rothstein making his way around Cincinnati today. Was at UC and Xavier practice today apparently. Coming to see the schools, but we'll start with UC basketball here. Year 3 of Wes Miller. I think last year you got to look at it as a success, to be honest. I know they were in the NIT semifinal. Obviously, the school across town won the NIT the year before, ended up in the Sweet 16 the year after. So I hate when people try to discredit an NIT season. I don't think that's fair, considering there's 400 Division I schools and 68 make the NCAA tournament. That I think that what they did, and also getting the guy that beat them in the NIT to come to your school is pretty nice as well. If he's able to play, of course. I know we've got a few questions on that. But it's year 3 of Wes Miller. It's the first year in Big 12 basketball, which just has the defense as Kansas, and Baylor, who not so long ago were national champions. It's the first year of Jordan Brand back in UC. Looks sick on the uniforms. The gear looks unreal. And then obviously the recruitment and transfers they brought in, Rayvon Griffith, obviously being a local kid, has a lot of people excited. Jizzle James, who I talked to a couple NBA scouts who worked the Iverson Classic and were really, really impressed with him. Said he's going to be a really, really good college guard. And then, of course, the transfers they brought in, they're waiting on some information on. They got the kid from Butler, who I saw last year do some pretty cool things. I think if you're a UC basketball fan, I don't really know what to expect because they do have such a tough conference schedule, obviously. But I think you have to feel pretty good about what they were able to accomplish this offseason.
Yeah, I think the encouraging thing about Wes is that you've seen him improve the roster each year.
Yeah.
So last year's team, what were they lacking heading into the season? They needed a alpha to go along with David DeJulius, a guy that could knock down shots from the perimeter. They went and got Landers Nolley. Landers Nolley obviously ended up leaving early. Had the chance to come back, left early because he had such a great season. He's now with, I believe, the Pelicans.
Yep.
This season,
got a couple Xavier teammates.
Yeah. This season, they needed more rim protection. They go out and get Jamil Reynolds. He's down 45 pounds in the best shape of his life. And then they get Aziz Bandiago from Utah Valley, who just absolutely destroyed Cincinnati in the NIT. I believe they had 12 and 11.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be excited about UC basketball. And I think with the move to the Big 12 and all the momentum that they have, it feels different, man. Like, I've followed UC since the Huggins days. I've seen, grew up watching Kmart, DeMar Johnson, Jason Maxill, and there's just a different vibe around UC basketball right now with how it's viewed. And you wouldn't think that it's crazy, just an apparel switch.
Yeah.
The type of juice that puts into it. Houston, Kelvin Sampson mentioned he was asked a couple years ago. He was asked, we've seen the rise of Houston basketball. What are you guys doing differently? And one of the first things he said was, well, for one, we switched to Jordan Brand, and the type of juice that gives a program when you have the right people around you to help grow things. It's unreal. And Wes has done a great job building the staff. Drew Adams, obviously, with his Indiana ties. Chad Dollar, one of the best recruiters in the country. You got Andre Morgan, who's a rising star in the college game. Jake Thielen was at one time, the youngest GM, or I'm sorry, director of player personnel in college basketball when he was at IU in Georgia. So the biggest thing that fans should be excited about is, there's a lot of juice with the recruiting and the switch to Jordan, but the staff and the continuity of that is something that really plays a big role in maintaining that level of success and expectations. Obviously, they're waiting on the decision of the NCAA on Aziz Bandiago and Jamil Reynolds. But from what I saw in practice, if those two guys are healthy, UC is going to be really tough to defend, and they're going to be really tough defensively just because of all the versatility, athleticism, and length that they have at both ends, regardless, even without those two. And I think the forgotten thing is, they still bring back their front court from last year. Odi Oguama's back. And that's something Wes made sure he mentioned in his preseason presser last week is, it's cool to be excited about all of the newcomers, but guys, we got a lot of people coming back too that have been a big part of this rebuild. You look at John Newman, wasn't healthy last year, one of their best perimeter defenders. He's back. Odi Oguama, Mr. Energy, he's back. Vic Locken, who was arguably their best player last year at times, he's back. There's obviously some questions at the point guard position. You've got two guys who are super talented, Jizzle James and Day Thomas. John Rothstein predicted Jizzle James as a starting point guard, but I'm telling you, Day Thomas can go, man. When I was sitting in practice last week watching them and watching those two go at it, it's a lot of fun. Day Thomas is the biggest difference between him and Mike Saunders, because that's been the comparison I've heard come up, is Day-Day's way more skilled when it comes to scoring. Mike was just a blur, could get to the rim, whereas Day-Day has a good handle. He can step back and hit a shot on you. He's strong with the ball. He just brings a different maturity to the game. Obviously, you're going from a JUCO to the best conference in college basketball, but it helps when you're going against, Jizzle James and Rayvon Griffith and even Seamus Lukosius. He's a guy that can, also step in as that secondary ball handler and provide something different as more of a point forward. That's something that Wes has mentioned, that, the questions about the point guard position really aren't validated just because of all the experience they have. It's an older team. You've got Dan Skillings, Rayvon, Jizzle, and Day Thomas. But after that, everyone's an upperclassman with, 3, 4, 5, and some 6 years of experience. CJ Frederick has played on 2 different, national championship caliber teams at Kentucky and Iowa. Was a key member on Iowa's, top 5 team that had Final Four aspirations. Then he goes to Kentucky, and he's a key member of team this preseason top 10. So I think with all the experience that they brought in from guys at other stops, I think that'll definitely help with this transition of the Big 12, just because what they're going to see in the Big 12, it's nothing these guys haven't seen before, so the stage isn't going to be too big for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to look real quick at while you were talking, I was pulling up their non-conference schedule. And I think what thing the Western staff did really well is they made sure they barely left the city. So if you look at opening night, UIC, Fifth Third Arena, Detroit Mercy that Friday, Fifth Third Arena, Eastern Washington right after that, a noon tip-off on a Sunday. Who schedules that? Seriously,
Yeah.
during football season, obviously they have the NKU rematch. We're going to get into the Norse a little later. Georgia Tech at home. They go to Howard. They have Florida Gulf Coast. They have the Crosstown that's obviously at Cintas this year. Bryant, and then you've got at Heritage Bank Classic, you've got Dayton. That's going to be fun.
Mm-hmm.
No weird, awkward storylines in that game coming up whatsoever.
Not at all. I have no clue what you're talking about.
None whatsoever. Merrimack, Stetson, and they round out conference play with Evansville So really one true road game in non-conference this year. I think that's good to do, especially because, you are going to Waco, you are going to Lawrence, you are going to Morgantown, you are going to Lubbock, um, and then, of course, you're going to Houston, who you're already familiar with from your time playing forever. But I think West did a really good job of kind of building the comfortability for this team because, yeah, you're going to play road games, sort of, kind of, I guess. Is Dayton considered the home team in that game?
Uh,
Um,
I'm not sure.
yeah, I
I
don't
think
think.
so. Wes mentioned because I was brought up to him. He was asked, "How did you come up with a non-conference schedule?" Because at first glance, you look at that and you're like, "Man, they kind of padded the non-con schedule." And when you dive deeper, if you're a college basketball nerd that's into the metrics and everything, there's some teams on there that were in the NCAA tournament last year. That some teams that were predicted to win their league or finish second in their league. And the big thing is that Wes mentioned is we play in the best college baseball conference. Um, my primary focus in the non-conference portion of the schedule is to make sure we're not trailing too much and wearing our team out because we're still trying to figure things out as well with all the new additions. They've got 7 newcomers, 7 really good guys that are coming to the program, but at the same time, there's still that transition period where you want to make sure you're not overwhelming your guys early in the season with all the travel and wearing them down.
Yeah.
And then obviously, NIL plays a part. Let's be honest here. The 2 of those games are a part of an MTE event where it's NIL related. And I think you're going to see that with a lot more teams. I think the Howard game in Washington, D.C., that's an area that Cincinnati wants to recruit. They've got some DMV ties on their staff. So it makes sense to go. And you've seen a lot more high-level coaches and programs going and playing these HBCU programs. And because they're in great recruiting hotbeds. So you go to Washington D.C. and that's a couple days that you're there getting your brand out to people. Um, I think the if you're a season ticket holder, you're probably a little disappointed with the non-conference schedule. But if you're a college basketball nerd and you really dive into the metrics and what these teams are predicted to do inside their league, it gives you a little bit more perspective that these teams will help prepare them for the conference schedule. Obviously, the only 2 big name brands are Xavier and Dayton, but I think it was smart scheduling by Wes. If his goal in the non-con is to just get continuity within his program and see what he has on the floor, use different lineups, he accomplished it with the schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. Build up your non-conference. I mean, play your non-conference the way you did this year. Get your continuity with your team. Play through your conference schedule. It's going to be really difficult because of the conference you're in. And then next year, load up on non-conference. I think that's genius. I think it's really smart for them. I love the idea of that they're not going to travel so much. And like you said, like it's a lot of talent, not just coming in, but what they have left over. You mentioned the guys like Odi Oguama and everything. Like, John Newman potentially could be back on the floor this year, hopefully, for his sake. Um, I know last year seeing him run around the boot was not very fun. One of my favorite players to cover, actually, it was always really fun in the press conferences.
Yeah.
And then obviously, um, you kind of mentioned those guys, the other guys as well. But I think if you're a UC fan, yeah, like you said, the non-conference schedule isn't something you're in love with, but you're also in a situation like you said where you can kind of build some stuff as well. We got a lot of UC basketball questions, so we can't probably do too much of a deep dive into our expectations for the program that we would like to do. But Ryan will have a show every week on this network that you can check out with any basketball and football conversations. So we want to get into some of the questions from our Patreon listeners, which, hey, if you are also not a member of our Patreon, please go to patreon.com/riverfrontcincy, and you also can get your questions included and be part of our family. So this is from Sydney Price, good friend of the Riverfronts. How do we expect UC's first season of the Big 12 to go? How excited are you for Rayvon Griffith and Jizzle James and their recruiting success lately?
So I think a lot of the expectations in year 1 of the Big 12, let's just be honest, it comes down to the waivers. And it's not so much because of the guys they have not being talented, it's just the depth. Every team in the Big 12 has 7 starter caliber players, and that's something that you have to have, especially when you get to the grind of you're playing in Lawrence, Kansas on a Tuesday night and then going to Waco on that Saturday. So I think expectations finish 500 in the league. Anything over that, because West Virginia made the tournament with a losing record. West Virginia was 7-11 in the
Yeah.
Big 12 last year and still made the NCAA tournament, just for perspective. So I think fans really need to keep that in mind, that every team is similar to Houston. Like you don't have a Tulsa or an East Carolina. You instead have, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. Like it's just a whole different level of basketball. So I think fans need to be patient, just understand that, hey, the record might not be that good, but win the games you're supposed to, and you're going to put yourself in position to make the NCAA tournament, which I think if they get the waivers, NCAA tournament should be the expectation, just because of how deep and talented they'll be, the length, athleticism, the versatility. They've got so much positional versatility with the size that they have on this year's team. Rayvon Griffith, it's crazy to think that, you're bringing in a guy that was top 60 in the country in his recruiting class, and he's maybe the 10th, 11th guy on your roster. Not because he's not a good player, but just because of the experience that they have with everyone else. Jizzle James, he's going to get a lot of playing time. He's going to have to grow up really quick. But I think his experience of playing at such a high level over the years, playing, in the Iverson Classic, playing for a really good Florida Rebels AAU program, and just having that experience of playing against these other high-level guys, I think that's really going to help with the transition. He's a bulldog. Like, you see him up close in person, he looks like a running back. He's just like his dad. He looks like
Yeah.
a running back more so than a point guard, because he's not – when you see him in person, he's way further advanced physically than most guys that come in. It's crazy to think, Dede Thomas has been in a college program for 2 years, and Jizzle might come in more physically developed than him. But, having Mike Rayfeld, arguably the best strength and conditioning coach in the country, that really helps, especially with his transition to the Big 12, because every night's going to be physical, and you're going to need that type of depth to compete night in and night out. Like I said, man, a lot of the expectations comes down to the waivers. I think 1 through 4, they can compete with anyone, but in the Big 12, you have to have 4 or 5 quality starter level guys if you want to compete night in and night in under the rim.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question is going to coming from, I should do something better and look more professional than having these on my phone, but that's neither here nor there. One of my immaculate grid buddies on a day-to-day basis, Kevin Lynch. Who leads UC in scoring? Who leads UC in minutes played? And will UC finally employ a fast-paced style that seems as it would best fit the team?
Leading scorer. Oh man. Leading scorer. I think I'm gonna go with either I'll give you 3 options, and I would take one of these 3 and give you guys the field. I would say it's either going to be Vic Locken, Seamus Lukosius, or CJ Frederick, which is kind of, you look at all the athleticism they have, and those, not that those guys aren't athletic, but I think it'll be one of those 3, and you guys can have the rest of the field. If I'm wrong, so be it. It's still early. I've seen one practice, but I think with, the looks that Wes wants to get CJ Frederick, and the same with Vic, and then the same with Seamus, the type of things he's in positions he's going to put them in on the floor to do multiple things. I think it'll be one of those 3 to lead the team in scoring. Minutes played, I think it might be CJ Frederick, just because, you look at, you break it down into positions. CJ's going to primarily play the 2. I saw Rothstein had him at the 3 earlier and Seamus at the 2. I don't see that happening. CJ's
Right.
going to primarily be a 2. And when you look at the roster, you don't have many other guys that are going to come in and play the 2. Dan Skillings, he's more of a 3. He can also slot down to the 4. Seamus, more of a 3, can slot down to the 4. Rayvon, same thing, more of a 3, can play 4 in a small ball. So I think I would say probably CJ, or if you can stay out of foul trouble, Vic Locken, one of those two. Dede Thomas and Jizzle James, I'd say it's probably going to be, a 25 and 15 split, or, a 22 and 18 split. I see those two playing really similar minutes just because they do bring different things to the floor. At the 5, you're going to have Jameel Reynolds, assuming he's healthy, or I'm sorry, assuming he gets the waiver, you would have Jameel Reynolds and Vic Locken kind of sharing minutes. And at the 4, you'd have Odie and Aziz Bandiago sharing minutes with guys like, Josh Reed, and then Seamus and Rayvon slotting in a small ball. So I would say CJ, just because you don't have many other 2 options behind him that are true 2s that are going to do what you need from him.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And then lastly, from my good buddy and Boone County High School alumni, Jordan Burlingame, you've kind of already tapped on this a little bit, and I know it's kind of, so what are the chances Aziz Bandiago and Jameel Reynolds get cleared to play? UC's chances depend on it.
It's hard telling, man. It's the NCAA. We saw the issue with Tez Walker where it took a bunch of backlash and UNC publicly calling them out for them to overrule their decision. Wes did mention in his most recent presser that they have submitted the paperwork, but out of respect to Aziz and Jameel's, personal situations, that's all he would say. But no one knows what the NCAA is going to do, man. It's when you have their fate in the NCAA's hands, it's hard telling. Like I don't think they've received I don't think either's been denied. I don't think it's either been approved, because I think you would see UC probably release something. Big 12 Media Day, I'll be there next Tuesday. I'll be in Kansas City next Tuesday and Wednesday. Men's basketball portion of that is on Wednesday. I do think we could maybe have a decision by then, but it wouldn't surprise me if we don't have a decision until the week of the first game. Just because you have over 800 transfers. Does that sound right? Somewhere between 750 to 1,000 transfers. So, that's if the NCAA is doing their due process the way they're supposed to, that's a lot of paperwork to get through. Agree. Yeah. The success of their season does kind of hinge on those two getting eligible. I mean, they're still going to win games without those two. They've got enough talent on the team to be competitive regardless, but having those two will take them to a different level just because of the depth.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like I said, if you're a Bearcat basketball fan, you got to be excited about what can happen this year. If you're a Bearcat basketball fan, you're probably not excited about our next segment, though.
So, Tim, you're obviously a little more an expert on the Musketeers.
Yeah.
Sean Miller coming off a Sweet 16 season we talked about before the show started. Is it just me, or has it been eerily quiet this offseason? Because usually there's a lot of hype around Xavier Basketball, regardless whether they're going to be good or not. And I feel like we haven't heard anything about them.
It's interesting, right? You would think for a team that just went to the NCAA tournament for the first time in 4 years, went to the Sweet 16, had a dominant win in the tournament at that against Pittsburgh, that, we would be talking about them quite a bit. They just had a stint in the Bahamas this summer where they played and kind of had a chance to kind of gel together. But there's a lot of really concern I'm kind of understanding within the fan base, and I understand it. So you're looking at, these are the guys who moved on from the program. Sule Boom, he's at the Nuggets training camp. Colby Jones just got drafted. He's playing for the Kings. Adam Kunkel is playing a pro ball overseas. Jack Nungy's playing pro ball in Italy. And you're like, okay, well, you kind of saw that coming, obviously. They're like, but Zach Freemantle and Jerome Hunter are coming back. Now that's not looking very good either. Freemantle had another foot surgery. Reports do come out that was a successful surgery. And then Jerome Hunter is going through a lot of testing, but just as good as well as anyone being around that program and from your past, they're not someone who's just going to throw a guy, roll the ball on the court and go, all right, man, go play, because we need you Saturday versus UC. That's not how they do things there by any stretch of the matter. So yeah, it's been eerily quiet. I think they're really excited with the players they've gotten in. I know a lot of people were kind of talking about the players they added really quickly, and they were recruiting those guys already. It's not like it was like, oh shit, we're down these guys, we need to go get them. So it's not like they were not needing forwards and bigs and things like that. So I am genuinely curious to see what life is like post those guys. And some names that we're going to probably talk about here throughout the conversation, guys like Davion McKnight coming over from Western Kentucky is a guy a lot of people are really excited about. Trey Green is a guy people are thrilled about the recruits they got in. And then what's year 2 of Desmond Claude look like is my biggest fascination. I saw today Rothstein projected him at the 3, and Desmond Claude was the backup point guard last year in some circumstances behind Colby Jones and Souley Boom. So it's going to be interesting because, yeah, it does kind of seem like compared to years past, like you said, Ryan, it's a little bleak, but also the guy they have coaching their program is a guy you can kind of count on, right, to get the most out of his players.
Yeah, I don't think anyone predicted that last year's team to go to the Sweet 16, and I think
No,
they gelled a lot quicker than Hey, they credit to them, man. They came into Cincinnati and absolutely took it to them in that first half, and into that second half.
that might have been the best cross-town game I've ever been to.
Yeah, I was. Where was I at for that game? I think I might have been out of town, and that's why I was not there. But yeah, awesome game, awesome atmosphere. Not the outcome you wanted if you're a Cincinnati fan. Awesome outcome if you're a Xavier fan. What is, you hit on Hunter and Fremantle, two, guys that were projected all Big East caliber players. How much does that affect them in the early season, especially with, them playing Cincinnati so early with it being at Centah? And what does Xavier's success look like without one or both of those guys?
I mean, you bring up Cincinnati, they play Purdue the 3rd game of the season at Mackey. Like, who the heck guards Zach Edey? And that's a big question. I do think it's going to take some time to gel. They do start with Robert Morris the same day UC starts with UIC because Cincinnati college basketball programs love scheduling Horizon League basketball programs, apparently for non-conference games to start the year. Always found that kind of funny. But yeah, I think it's going to take them. It's going to be really fascinating to see what they can possibly do there. So, not having those guys, you're expecting a lot from the other players. The Djokovic's of the group who everyone's really, really excited about. Lazar Djokovic, he was a guy who was actually looking at going into the NBA academy overseas. Abu Ushmain, who's another big transfer, is a guy who's probably going to be kind of getting the majority of the time at the 5 to start this year. So what does he bring in for his first time playing in the Big East as well? So not having Fremantle and Hunter, especially because Hunter was like a revelation last year. His first year was Travis Steele's last season, and things just didn't click with him his first year at Xavier. And then Sean Miller just unlocked something new in him, and you saw it from the first game of the season last year. And it just kind of seemed like whatever happened with him just kind of switched, that switch he flipped and it's what he brought. He was their best defender in stretches, won a couple games for them early in the season last year. So not having that continuity when you're already, if you look at this, Ryan, like look at that projected starting 5 right now. One of those guys was on the team last year. So again, you trust Sean Miller to be able to get the most out of his players because that's what he does. But you're also looking at a lot of really unique dynamics there as well to see what they can potentially go for. Names that we're going to be really excited about, and I know we'll get to quite a bit of this. Trey Green, Dalen Swain is a guy people are really, really talking about. Trey Green obviously being the freshman guard as well. I mentioned his name already a couple times. So I think Xavier's guard play is going to be really, really good. I just really have a lot of concerns about, the backcourt and how that's going to look. The front court and how that's going to look.
Yeah, you brought up Trey Green, arguably the best shooter in that freshman class coming in. A lot to be excited about with him and Dalen Swain. Who's the transfer that you're most excited about? Like, who do you think is going to have the biggest impact on their success this year?
I think it's Davion McKnight. I think that's kind of the guy you're the most pumped for. He's going to be more than likely the guy with the ball in his hands majority of the time in the half court. has some Sule Boom tendencies. I don't know if he's as good of a shooter by any means, but just the fact of just trying to do everything he possibly can to make things happen uh, really kind of commands the offense and the reports I'm reading. So I think Davion's the guy, and also having college experience and having been playing in those situations. Played for Rick Stansberry, who has a very similar tendencies to Sean Miller. So that's going to kind of help a lot. But I think Davion might end up being potentially the leader of the team down the stretch. And you talked quite a bit in our last segment about how good the Big 12 is, and it absolutely is. The Big East is pretty front loaded as well. I mean, I think we're lucky that we're in a situation where the two schools that we're covering here have the two best conferences in the country. These are if you look at national championship winners in the last 10 years, I think 6 of them are from these two conferences.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, Big East is very similar to Big 12. May not be as deep per se because Georgetown's there, and that kind of decreases all arguments. But you know, UConn's bringing a lot of their national championship back. Marquette's going to be really, really good this
Mm-hmm.
year. I fully suspect Rick Pitino's going to have St. John's ready. That's who he
Oh, he
is,
did. He
and
did outstanding at Iona.
oh yeah, absolutely. And so, there could be a situation like you mentioned, like UC could make the tournament this year at 7-11. Xavier could potentially make the tournament as a play-in, being the 6th team in the Big East because of how deep they are as well.
Jack Nunge was a guy that killed a lot of teams last year because of his
Yeah.
versatility, both inside and being able to step out and hit the three. How do you think Xavier's, I guess, how they do things schematically, offensively, kind of switches this year, not having a guy that's able to, stretch the floor and open up more of the paint for guards to drive?
I think that's where Djokovic comes in. Having international experience is going to help him out a lot. And he's a scorer. He's a really good scorer. He's a good rebounder. But they're gonna need a lot there. So it's gonna be different, especially these first couple weeks. You mentioned Nunji just having that ability to kind of pop out and like get an open shot at the top of the key. It was his bread and butter there for stretches early in the season last year. I think Djokovic has the ability to do that as well. Maybe not as consistent as Nunji was because he was so skilled with that in that role. He was a really good role man, one of the best in the country in that circumstance. So I am genuinely curious to see, do they go to more of like a 5-out style? Do they go more to, um, you know, playing the two bigs they have, whoever's out there on the block, and just having one come out to the corner on a dribble drive? So I guess the easiest way to say this is I don't 100% know, but I do think they have options, and I think that's a good thing.
Is it kind of weird that obviously Cincinnati and Xavier the last 2 years so many new pieces and that's becoming the norm? Is it kind of weird to you that every year we're looking at a different roster construction and saying, okay, this is the team this year? And
Right.
that's normal. You have a completely new team every year, it seems like now with the transfer portal and NIL. So it's just a whole different dynamic to college basketball where you're not seeing guys progress from their freshman to senior year because they don't get the playing time they want after their freshman year, they're out.
Well, I think the funniest example of that is, those guys have these individual performances in the crosstown. It's always like it was that guy's game. So last year was the Sule Boom game. The year before
Yeah.
was the Jack Nunji game. You see that it's like always like some guy who's like there and gone. Um, Granted, a couple years ago, Paul Scruggs during the COVID game had a really good game. Jaron Cumberland had the big one the last time the UC won. So obviously those are guys who are staples of their program. But yeah, you are starting to see like would we be shocked if UC pulls this one off and it's the Jameel Reynolds game? I don't think so.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think about that because I think that's what gave the rivalry so much juice during mixed years. Is it was different, man. You had guys playing against each other in the Devereaux Summer League. You had guys, coming in and seeing each other from their freshman to senior year. So every year, it's like, man, I don't want to lose to this guy again. So there was just, I don't know, I feel like there was a lot more juice. You ask certain people, they'll say, no, it's still Cincinnati Xavier regardless. Like there's
Oh yeah.
always going to be juice in that rivalry, which there is. but I think that it's more for the fan base than the actual players. Like I don't think that the players genuinely do not like each other like we saw, in the mid late 2000s and in the 90s. I don't think that. Granted, you go back to the Yancey Gates days, yeah, it was obviously still really heated, but I
What
think over
happened there?
I have no clue. I heard there might have
Yeah,
been like a brawl or something
something
that,
like that.
left Kenny Freeze crawling off the floor, but I don't know, man.
But it's
It's still a really fun rivalry. Like it's a game that I hate and love at the same time. Hate it because Cincinnati hasn't had as much success in the game over the past 10, 15 years, but love it just because of the passion it brings out on both fan bases.
it's my favorite day of the year, every year. I
Well, yeah, you
really
got
like. Well, I know. There's that portion. Don't be wrong. But I love being in the arena, regardless of or who's hosting that year. There's just something about like it's the day, the tip off's normally like 6:30, 7 o'clock on Saturday. I'm normally in the arena about 3 o'clock that day and just kind of taking it all in. This year I kind of just walked around Fifth Third, like saw all the shirts on the seats. I thought I was like, man, this is so cool. Um, and obviously it's a special catering day that day, and obviously that doesn't hurt and getting there a little early. But you mentioned kind of outside of the area. Yeah, there's always it's not what it used to be thing, but for us in this area, like it still means so much. And I think Mark Titus, it went back when he was on Grantland, wrote this amazing article about how uh, UC Xavier is only for UC and Xavier fans, and that's okay. And just talking about how like the rest of the country doesn't pay attention to it, but here it's circled on our calendars, and we're just fine with that. And it's just a fantastic piece.
yeah, I would agree. What is your favorite crosstown moment
Ooh. All right. Does this count
that
games I've
you've been a
worked?
part of, either as a fan or covering it?
Okay. So, funny story. My first crosstown I covered, they had an overpopulation of media applicants. And it was national people. It was like Jeff Goodman who was in town. John Fanta was in town right before John Fanta blew up. And so I get to the arena that day, and the SID is like, "Hey man, I'm really, really sorry." He's like, I don't have a bunker for you today." He's like, "But here, go sit in the stands. Enjoy yourself, whatever you need, just let me know." I was like, "Okay. You want me to sit in the stands at the crosstown shootout for free?" Like, okay. So that was the game when Najee Marshall like just blew up. It was like incredible that whole game. So I'm sitting there in the middle. There's like UC fans in front of me. I'm right there on the right next to the tunnel at Cintas, for the bottom of the bowl, and just kind of being in there and kind of feeling like I had this lady who was like, "Well, who are you pulling for, UC or Xavier?" And I was like, "Ma'am, I'm working." And it was awesome.
Yeah. I'd say my favorite moment was probably the game where Trayvon Blewett just came in and absolutely went bonkers
Yeah,
at
that was a good one.
41, but JP McCura couldn't guard Jaron Cumberland. And Jaron Cumberland single-handedly let them back in the second half. And that atmosphere at that game was the loudest I've ever seen Fifth Third Arena. And I've been in there for a lot of big games. I was in there when Marquette was top 10 and Sean Kilpatrick exploded to, kind of solidify their tournament chances. Like I've been in there for some really big games throughout the history of that arena. And that crosstown shootout that year was just it was amazing. Like that's when Jaron Cumberland kind of blew up on this and came on the scene and was like, I'm here, get ready for it.
Yeah, because that was did I die? Wait, you can still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You're just your screen's froze.
That was
Yeah.
weird. Okay,
Yeah.
now we're back. That game's so funny to me because yeah, like that game was awesome. Trayvon going crazy what Jaron did. It's right before Ed Sumner gets hurt, which was really painful. Because he was not very good in that game. But I think I talked to Kevin Johnson about it one time, and I think what he told me was he's like, yeah, he's like, we just kind of were like, whatever, Trayvon's gonna do Trayvon things, we'll stop everybody else, and that's exactly what they did. So that game's great. I love it, man. I know the success has obviously been one sided there for a while, but if you're a UC basketball fan, you're probably looking at this year, right? Like, this might be the year we freaking go in Cintas and win because there's all these question marks about the Xavier Bigs. So it's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, well, here's the crazy thing, man. You look at all of the good teams that both programs have had. UC hasn't won in Centos since what, 2000? Last time they won was Steve Logan's year.
Yeah, the
That's
first year of
crazy. You,
Cintas.
you look at some mixed good teams. You look at the Huggins years before he left in 2006. That's just crazy that a UC team has not gone in there and won since, I believe it's 2000. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm almost positive
2000 or 2001. Yeah, I don't have it in front
it
of
was
me.
Steve Logan's year, and they just went in there and blew the doors off of Xavier. But I mean, credit Xavier, man. They went from the A10 and have built their program to what it is today. So, as a UC fan, it adds more fuel to the fire. And I think with them going to the Big 12, it's only going to amplify it because with the way West is recruiting right now, like there's a lot to be excited about. They just got Tyler Betsy, top 30 prospect for 2024. Obviously, Tyler McKinley, best player in Ohio, coming in next year, top 60 kid.
How does
So
Xavier offer?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Came down to Xavier, Ohio State, and UC, and UC was the move. But a lot of exciting things for both programs, regardless of who you root for. The fan bases don't like each other, and that's understandable. But if you're just a college basketball fan, there's a lot of respect for both programs and what they've accomplished.
The one thing that makes me laugh in the rivalry, and it is very silly and it's fun, is the whole like Xavier's in Norwood thing. I'm like, okay, look, the postal code says Cincinnati, Ohio. Let's just move on. All right. I get it. I understand it. But like Xavier fans aren't like, we're going to have the voyage over to Clifton. It's like, so it always makes you laugh.
Well, and the funny thing is, there's UC fans that get offended when you
Offended.
when you say Xavier's in Norwood because they live in Norwood. They're like, no, it's in Evendale or whatever, the
Yeah.
Evanston, whatever. They're like,
There's no
no, it's in
winning.
Evanston,
Yeah.
and then it becomes a big debate. Like on Chad Brindle's side, it becomes a big debate when that game comes on and someone says they're in Norwood. You immediately have certain members saying no, it's in Evanston, and you have people like showing screenshots of maps, and it's just like, guys, it's Cincinnati zip code. Who cares?
Yeah, it's
Um,
like Wes's first one in his presser. He's like, we're really excited to make the voyage up to Norwood. And I thought that was really good.
yeah, well, and then you get the whole people were crushing Travis Steele because he twirled his skyline instead of cutting and keeping. So it's like, both fan bases will try to find anything and everything.
Yeah,
And it's fun. I mean, sometimes it gets a little too intense.
it does.
And people just need to keep respect that it's just a game. At the end of the day, it's just a game. In a week, you're gonna, then to be honest, it really doesn't matter who wins this game anymore. It doesn't. Some people call me crazy for saying that, but in the grand scheme of things, would I rather win against Xavier or get a road win at Baylor, Texas Tech, or Kansas? I'm
Right.
taking one of those wins because those are going to hold more weight in the NCAA's eyes than a early season December game on the road or at home.
Yeah, it
So
matters for the bragging rights. It matters for the fan bases. But you're right. If Xavier loses at home this year to UC, breaks the Cintas streak, but goes to Philadelphia and beats Villanova, I'll take the trade.
right, yeah, it's like nobody will care. It's a fun game, but with the conference both teams are in now, it's another game. I mean, it really is because you have
Yeah.
so many Q1 opportunities to build your resume at the end of the year.
We did get a question from Noah Francis. I want to make sure I get that in before we move on, do a little bit of NKU conversation. I'm really excited to talk about this one, by the way. So he asked, who fills Adam Kunkel's spot? And we kind of talked about, we mentioned his name a couple times. I hate the cliche it's going to be all these guys, but I think it could definitely end up being Trey Green. I think just his scoring ability. The difference between Kunkel and those guys is, and you know this very well from being tapped in with the local high school area and Kunkel being from Cooper High School, is you might be able to like replace Adam Kunkel's ability to shoot. You're never going to replace Adam Kunkel's confidence levels. There's just no one who's going to be able to replace that. And I think that's where Yeah, you could probably replace the scoring ability with a few guys, but no one's gonna replace that. Like, oh, I missed 4 in a row. Don't worry, I'm getting the fifth.
Yeah, well, and Kunkel's size, like a lot of people don't realize how big he is until you
Yeah.
stand next to him. It's similar with Sean McNeil. You know,
Hmm.
those two that you look back at that Cooper team. I know we're getting off topic here, but you look at back at that Cooper team with Kunkel, Sean McNeil, Dante Hendricks, who was going through the pro process for the NFL. Um, God, Braden Runyon played baseball for Texas Tech. Like the
Yeah.
amount of Division I athletes, I think they had another kid that played baseball at NKU. The amount of athletes on that team is just unreal
Chris
for you.
McNeil.
Yeah, yeah.
Chris is
Getting
our friend, so I have to make sure I mention him.
right, getting back to Kunkel, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with his confidence and swagger. Just he was fearless, man. Even when he was a freshman playing at Cooper, going in to the game, he has always been fearless. And I would say he played with a little bit more attitude than JP McCura. He just didn't annoy as many fans.
Yeah.
There was just something about JP McCura, man, that I don't know. Like I covered him, when I covered Xavier his freshman year. There was just something about him then that I could tell when I would cover games and opposing fans would come there. They did not like him. Even at the TBT this year, like you see
Yeah.
fans, they still do not like him. And it's just, I don't know, Kunkel and him, different type of swagger and confidence. Kunkel's probably a little bit more likable being a local guy. But yeah, you're right. I don't know that Trey Green is the one to replace him, just because I don't know that Trey Green is going to be able to defend at the level that Kunkel did. Because there were times where Kunkel had some big defensive stops for Xavier. I didn't watch every game, I'll be completely honest, but the games I did watch and follow because of Kunkel, he came up with big plays at both ends of the floor. And I just don't. Trey Green's not known for his defense. He's a guy that is going to come in, he's going to knock down shots and kind of run the offense for you.
Yeah, I agree. So that brings us to our final team to talk today. For this debut episode of Riverfront U, over an hour. Was not expecting that, but this is a good
No,
combo.
same.
So, we're gonna talk about NKU, and obviously, this is kind of the third school when really, respectively, let's be honest, in the last decade, they've been the most successful school as far as NCAA tournament appearances. The three we're
Mhm.
talking about, um, coming off their fourth NCAA tournament qualifier. Obviously, one of those was the COVID year, so they didn't get to play. In 7 or 8 years of being D1, 7 years of being in the Horizon, I don't think people understand how many schools do 4 NCAA qualifiers in 7 years.
Especially in a
It's
league like the Horizon.
right, yeah, we're like, you don't wanna be the 1 seed in the tournament because history says the 1 seed doesn't win. Um, this is really fun because we talk about this with just now with UC and Xavier, where it's like these guys are rotating in and out, these different names. Their core three is the same core three as it was last year,
Mhm.
and that's Marquez Warwick, who is awesome, super good. Obviously had that great game against UC last year.
Mhm.
Sam Vinson, local kid from Highlands, who has really made quite the name for himself within college basketball, and Trey Robinson going into his senior year, who's become like a knockdown corner three shooter. And Darren Horn and staff, which he's kept a lot of his staff together, and that's really impressive too in this day and age in college basketball. Um, what they've been managed to do this year, as far as like who they brought in, and then also kind of what they scheduled. So they have the toughest non-conference schedule in school history. And I don't know if you saw this or not, Ryan, but at Horizon League Media Day, he kind of was like, we still have work to do. We haven't done all the things we want to do yet. And one of the things he particularly mentioned was we're still yet to beat a Power Five on the road. And their road schedule for non-conference is a lot of Power Five.
They've got St. Mary's at Cincinnati November 19th for a 2 p.m. kickoff or 2 p.m. tip off. Terrible time. The Bengals don't play that Sunday though, so it shouldn't affect the crowd too much. And I believe they play Washington. Is that the
Yeah,
last
they go
Power
to
Five?
Washington.
Yeah, I'd say Washington is probably the most likely of the bunch, just because St. Mary's has had things rolling out there. They're competing with the Gonzagas. I
Right.
think I think Cincinnati at home. I can't see NKU beating them at home. But Washington, I mean, hard telling what they get with them. And it wouldn't surprise me. Sam Vincent's a guy that was extremely underrated and under recruited,
Yes.
especially after that Highlands state championship run. Like he single-handedly led them to that state championship title. So it's going to be interesting. They lost some key pieces. Trayvon Faulkner, I think, could be a loss as far as depth at the guard position. But when you return Warwick and Vincent, your backcourt's pretty solidified, especially in a league like the Horizon. I think the big question is the Wright State game. How intense is that this year?
So I think that kind of goes to new more levels than UC Xavier at times. Like I've been in both arenas for that game, and it's intense, man. It's really intense. So that's obviously kind of the other team that's really competed with them for kind of the class of the conference the last kind of few years. I wish it was Oakland for the sake of I love Greg Campy, and he's been there for longer than I've been alive. So that's saying something. But that game's always crazy. And you kind of mentioned just the intensity of it each and every year. It's not fun to be at. I'll tell you what. It's not a fun drive home if they go up there and lose. Plus that arena sucks to watch cover a game. It's awful.
My first experience at that arena was covering Jaron Cumberland in the Ohio State tournament. And I can remember sitting on the floor and just looking around like, man, this place is a dump. Like,
yeah.
I mean, granted, you got to look at the program, but Wright State traditionally been a good program. You would think that NKU, I think NKU for their level, they've got a really nice arena. It's starting to get a little outdated, but they've got a nice arena for the level that they play at. And you go to Wright State, and it's just, I mean, it's a dump. I hate to put it that way. I'm sorry if there's any Wright State fans listening, but the place is not, considering the success they've had, you think they pour more money into making upgrades and things. Similar to Miami. Miami is cool venue, but you would hope and think that at some point, they're able to do some renovations with, all the money they've coming in through other, subsidize their athletic programs. But it's college sports, man. It's hard telling with the way things are right now and today.
Yeah, for sure. Especially places like that.
What is the realistic expectation for NKU this year? Like, what are you expecting from this team with the big three that they do return?
I think regular season championship for sure has to kind of be their thought process. Not just those three, but you look at some of the guys they brought in. Dustin Ipasu played in the NBL for the Adelaide 36ers. To put in context, Josh Giddey played for the Adelaide 36ers before he could play for the Oklahoma City Thunder. They bring in Kian Itajiri from Marquette. Obviously, Darren Horn was on Shaka Smart's staff at Texas. So that they had that kind of play together. And then Jeremiah Israel from Lloyd High School. Mm-hmm. So they're definitely building depth to kind of move on. Like you mentioned, the Trayvon Faulkners, the Bryson Langdons, the kids like that who moved on, whether it be one way or another. Chris Brandon, who was a huge rebounder for them, was awesome. Also in that UC game last year. Yeah, it was unbelievable that game.
How do you think Darren Horn's experience at these, Power 5 level conference teams, how do you think that experience has helped with the continuity from Brandon to him, and then to, basically not even miss a beat and arguably be better now?
I think he is, right? And I know it's not a dog on John, because I really like John. John was always really good to me. Don't have a complaint about him. I know the stories that are out there. I've read them all just as much as you guys have. He was never, ever bad to me. And I will always be grateful for how he helped me out when I needed him. But I think Darren has surpassed him as like the best coach in program history. Mm-hmm. I think what he's been able to do there and kind of pick up where he left off. If you think about it, they're 3 minutes away from 5 of 7 NCAA tournament appearances. That Wright State conference title game that Vincent struggled down the stretch. If he doesn't do that, they win that game too. So I think he's just built some continuity. I think he's done really well in the transfer portal, bringing kids in. Cade Meyer is a kid he brought in who was all Horizon at Green Bay, is now going to be played at NKU. So I'm sure that's going to be a stinger for the Green Bay fan base. But I think he's kind of made it his, like, he's the guy, and he just signed an extension, so he's gonna be there for a little longer as well. And like I said, like keeping his staff together has been really, really impressive.
Well, and I think that's the key, especially at a level like that, because it is so easy for, a UC to go and get an Andre Morgan, who was at Middle Tennessee State. It's so easy for a program to pluck guys like that. The fact that he's been able to keep his staff intact, I think helps with the continuity of the program.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. Like I said earlier, regular season championship, which obviously isn't always fun in the Horizon League because the one seed always loses in the tournament. But I have to think that they have in mind to be the team that breaks that because of the success they've had, because who they have coming back and who they brought in. They're gonna be able to score, and that matchup zone. No matter how talented the team is defensively, the matchup zone is such a pain in the ass to play against, and
Yeah.
they execute it very, very well.
Oh, that was UC couldn't crack him. That was what Wes Miller said in his post game presser. Just first half, they did some really good things against the matchup zone. Second half, they couldn't do anything. They were forced to settle for jumpers and couldn't hit the bright side of a barn and led to a loss. Arguably the biggest win in NKU history.
I would
So
say it is at the moment, yeah, until they get the tournament win. Um, History always shows them, though, they're always so close to winning those Power 5 games. You know, they
yeah,
played
they
Kentucky in the tournament, and they played them pretty well with them.
competed with Texas Tech.
Yeah,
Um, the cool thing about NKU's success and rise is that it was kind of built on the shoulders of Drew McDonald.
I know.
So you've got this local kid, Newcath grad, and their program has kind of been built on the success that he helped with over the years. And then that's you still see Drew at NKU games.
Yeah, he's doing broadcasting now.
Yeah, well, and you go to the last year at the UC and KU game, Drew's just sitting on the floor having a beer, enjoying the game. So it's kind of cool, man. Like their success being built on the shoulders of a local guy, and we're kind of seeing it with Sam Vincent now.
Yeah.
Another guy that I think is going to have a really good career there that could maybe surpass Drew McDonald. We'll see.
I was kinda curious. I didn't necessarily think him and Marquez would leave, but I was really curious if there was gonna be a lot of feelers to see if they'd have interest in playing at other schools. Um, Especially with all the guys Xavier lost, I didn't know if that would be something of interest. I'm not reporting anything, I'm speculating strictly here, but I was genuinely curious if going into this year if those guys were gonna stay, and I'm glad they did.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. College basketball is fun when you have local teams. Like obviously, Cincinnati and Xavier fans are never going to root for the other. How people without a bias do that and root for all. I root for the local teams: Louisville, Kentucky, Xavier, Cincinnati. Look, if you're a Cincinnati fan, you don't root for anyone else that's local in the tournament. If you're a Xavier fan, odds are you're not rooting for anyone else that's local in the tournament. And the thing is, though, is because you're battling some of those programs for recruits. So if they're having success, that's affecting you in more than one way, and odds are it's affecting you in the recruiting as well.
Yeah, I remember really well you mentioning that. So the Najee Marshall game, going into the press conference after, Jaren really struggled that game. It was the John Brandon year with Jaren, which we all have heard all the
Mhm.
speculation on that. And someone asked Travis, like, "Were you shocked by this?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, someone asked Travis Steele, like, his thoughts on how Jaren played. He's like, "That's it's a bad day." He's like, "I recruited Jaren Cumberland, so I know the kind of player he is." And that's a very common conversation. We just talked about that um, with the recruit from earlier who had an offer from both schools. So
Well,
it's pretty
the
common.
interesting thing is Tyler McKinley and Ray Vaughn were both obviously recruited by both programs. Trey Green was recruited by both programs. You see, backed off a little bit because they were still in on Isaiah Collier. Obviously, Collier went to USC, number one overall player in the country. And then,
Hopefully, future Chicago Bull.
yeah. And then even Dalen Swain, I don't know how much interest West showed, but Dalen Swain was recruited by both as well. So I think you're starting to see more head-to-head battles between the two again, which is, it's kind of cool, man, because it gets that juice back into the rivalry when they do ultimately go against each other. You can't tell me that Trey Green isn't going to come into this year's game with a little extra motivation, knowing that UC maybe,
Right.
I don't want to say they slow played him just because I don't know for a fact that's what happened, but they did cancel his visit when he was supposed to visit because they were still in on Isaiah Collier. So if you're a Cincinnati fan, let's just hope he doesn't have a Trayvon Blewett type game where he just goes absolutely bananas and knocks down 6 to 8 threes, and that's the reason you lose.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited to have this coming up. Before we go ahead and wrap this up and we kind of talk about what else is going on around the Riverfront, Ryan, tell us a little bit about At-Large Bid Bearcats and what we can expect from your show this basketball season.
So at large bid Bearcats, right now during football season, tomorrow night I'll have Jim Kelly Jr. on with me to help preview Iowa State. Jim is one half of the radio's the Bearcat radio broadcast with Dan Horde. So having him kind of in there and giving a different perspective with that bird's eye view is pretty cool. And then I'm working on getting Mo Ager on for the following week with the Baylor show. I've been talking to Mo. So as far as during basketball season, we'll hopefully do a show. It will really depend on the day that Wes has his presser. So right now that's usually on like a Tuesday or Wednesday, and we'll try to do a show, that night, just because we're able to recap the weekend games, take a look at the maybe matchup that happened the day before, and then preview the weekend matchups coming up. So I would look for that show on either Tuesday or Wednesday. We'll dive into the upcoming schedule, kind of recap what happened in the previous games, go over, outstanding performers, talk a little stats. I'm working on getting some, different former players to come on and kind of give their take on what they're seeing out there. So it's going to be a lot of fun, man. We just started doing the ALB Bearcats pod within the last couple months. We've seen a pretty good following with the recruiting stuff we've been doing on the football side. We have had Jim Kelly Jr., Mo Ager on the show, so that's kind of helped with getting other professional insight on what they're seeing, because that's what they do for a living. They cover, like you said, we're dads that are out here, covering the Bearcats, covering the Musketeers. These are guys, that's what they do for a living. So getting their take and getting their response on how things unfold, that's kind of cool to add to our content. But yeah, I'm super excited, man. The ALB is something that kind of grew organically. Just started doing it with covering recruiting, and it's kind of led into game talk. We'll try to have a different guest on every week. If not, you'll see myself for 20 to 30 minutes recapping the games and giving my thoughts on how things played out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very, very excited. I appreciate you helping me by taking that role because I loved being in arenas every night, but my wife did not.
Yeah.
So, and understandably. And on my end, yeah, so Musketeer Monday. I'll be here every Monday to kind of talk about the weekend coming up, preview the games coming up as well, especially the Big East has that 2 games a week schedule, which is always a pain in the butt to kind of prepare for and was on a long homestand. But I'll be doing that as well. And then letting this cat out of the bag, we will have a really fun show on Fridays here on Riverfront U called NBA Friday because Lord knows I cannot stop talking about the National Basketball Association. So that's going to be a fun show. We'll talk about a current topic. We'll do a throwback topic for a segment, and we'll end every episode with a fantasy draft, just different things. So maybe keep that on there if you guys subscribe to the Riverfront U feed on your app of choice. Or if you subscribe to the Riverfront here on YouTube, we'll have every episode here as well for you guys. So, Ryan, again, thanks for this, man. I'm really glad we got this started. The conversation went much longer than I expected, but it was very good. So I'm excited to get this ball rolling, man.
Same here, man. Can't wait for college basketball to start. We'll try to do a show next week, 2 shows next week, one for the football game, and then I will be at Big 12 Basketball Media Day on Wednesday. So we'll try to do a kind of like a 20 to 30 minute show recapping that and talking about the preseason rankings, player rankings, and what the experience was like out at T-Mobile Center in Kansas City.
Yeah, for sure. Around the riverfront, I want to make sure I get into this before I forget because I have a tendency to forget this every week. So don't forget to check out Riverfront Bengals with Joe and Greg as they're recapping the Arizona Cardinals win this week and getting you ready for Sunday against the Seattle Seahawks. The Riverfront on Friday, you'll get Nate and Chad answering all your questions during the Reds offseason. And then, of course, every Sunday, you can check out me and Ben Brown on Late Night Reds. Still giving you your fun live Sunday night hangout to cry that the Reds are not in the playoffs right now and other teams are. But again, thank you all for tuning in to our first episode of Riverfront U. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already and follow us on your podcast app of choice. And please leave us a nice 5-star review. And again, if you want to be part of the Patreon family, patreon.com/RiverfrontCincy. We're not going to break your bank account, but we would definitely love to have you there. So take it easy, everyone, and we will see you soon.